going to be going. We are now live, Dave. So just like to welcome you today, Dave, and great to have you on our live call today.
Yeah, good to be with you. I've been looking forward to this. How exciting.
Awesome. Okay, so Dave, I'm just going to go through a couple of nuts and bolts, and then I'm going to hand over to you. So first of all, just like to really welcome everybody again to this live coaching call. And of course, our focus is trace, face, and replace. I'd like to thank everybody for the input that you've been putting into the community. It's great to see the mutual support starting to flow for one another, the sharing of truth coaches, realistic self-talk. And it's really gives me that sense that we're really starting to function as a community. So that's really cool. Remember that this 10 weeks is about embedding some of the tools and strategies into your life so that when we finish the 10 weeks, that you've really got some fundamental insights and skills under your belt, such as using the question why. It will be second nature to you. Want to continue to encourage you, those who are maybe sitting back a little bit in the community, to get involved and to get yourself into the forum and functioning. And hey, because it's a big part of the whole opportunity to grow over these next 10 weeks. And I'd also like to thank everybody who's posted a question, and I'm pretty sure we're going to get through all of those questions today. And so we're going to start off with a kind of bit of an overview question to Dave, and that is, why is trace, face, and replace such an important part of the living wisdom approach? So Dave, over to you.
Yeah, good question. Well, the reason is that everything begins with either a cognitive belief or a subconscious assumption. And I make that division deliberately. Cognitive means a belief you have and that you know you've got it. An assumption is a belief you have that you don't know you've got. It has not yet been tested, and therefore it hasn't penetrated your cognitive mind. It still lies in the realms of the subconscious. So think assumption, think subconscious, think cognitive, think belief. Dogma and dogmatism is a focus on rational beliefs, but penetrating the subconscious is where Freud took us and reminded us that a lot of conflicts are not resolved because they're beyond the reach of the cognitive mind. Blaise Pascal, the heart has reasons that reason knows nothing of. You can translate that in the words of Paul, who will deliver me from this heart of death? And so what we're trying to do here is give people tools to actually drill down into the core beliefs and the assumptions. And cognitive counseling appeals to the need for the rational and the emotive relationship to be understood. Many people start with the emotional. Well, the emotional is not the beginning place. If you saw the movie Inside Out, they got that completely wrong. Yes, there are core emotions, but emotions are merely reflecting what you're thinking, what you're believing, what you're concluding, what is going on deep within. And a large proportion of our daily emotions are actually rooted in childhood experiences, childhood memories, and childhood conclusions. With trace it, face it, replace it, we seek to trace the lie. We're not here to trace the truth. That's already looking after itself. We're here with a diagnostic tool to trace the lie. And once we've traced it, only then can we face it. And the face it is the crisis point. And the thing that distinguishes living wisdom from many, many other counseling models, although not Jay Adams' nouthetic counseling, his is one of the few models that takes confrontation seriously. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he was the Baptist who pulled counseling single-handedly out of the client-centered Carl Rogers swamp that it had buried itself in the 80s. And so we do confront people with the misbelief in the face it part of the trilogy: trace it, face it, replace it. And that is a crisis point. You must confront the traitors in your army, just as a president, prime minister, or king also must do. And those traitors are misbeliefs or mistaken beliefs. They are conclusions that do not accord with reality, and only then can you replace it with the truth, tailor-made truth, insight that can set you free, truth coaches. And so that's the skeleton of the flesh that we will be putting around this whole process. And if you get the skeleton upright, then it's a much easier matter to start putting the other tools on, such as unbearable feelings or whatever. Was that a good answer?
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. And a great entry point into our live coaching call today. Dave, how could I know? So this whole crisis point is clearly a critical part of the whole process. Yes, how do I know that I've been successful in that?
Tears, panic, phobias emerge, attitudes from childhood that are totally redundant. Sometimes there's a tantrum, sometimes there's a huge sense of relief that the saboteur has finally been unmasked. Suddenly, sometimes there's shock. My clients register all those emotions, and ones I've never heard of sometimes. Sometimes it makes their eyes water and their nose run. Sometimes they just sit in stunned silence. But my clients always register something when we finger their traitors, because this thing has been hiding in the darkness, in the ignorance, and in the family mottos, and in the emotions for many, many years most times. And it's quite a surprise to realize that your best friend is a traitor, and that your most loyal soldier has been working against your success your whole life.
So, Dave, what might happen if, for instance, I've done some tracing, but I don't seem to be getting free? Is that because maybe I'm not getting down to the right level?
The first thing is, it's never good for a doctor to do their own diagnosis. When a doctor diagnoses themselves, there are two fools in the surgery. There's the fool of a patient and the fool of a doctor. And actually, it can be illegal for a doctor to diagnose themselves for this very reason, that if you do your own tracing, you may or may not hit the real target. How do you address your blind spots? By definition, it is not possible for you to address your blind spots. And so with the tools, you may be able to find your blind spots, or you may need a professional to help you. I have been able to help people trace issues in their lives in 6 minutes that they couldn't do in 60 years, simply because I have the tools and I'm not part of the problem. It's very difficult, if you're the problem, to become the solution all by yourself. And so somebody actually who can penetrate your mindset with a few very powerful, very potent questions is going to turn up those traitors very quickly, if they know what they're doing.
That's excellent. Thank you, Dave.
And by the way, your people will know what they're doing by the time we're finished. That's a promise.
Yeah, and that's really comforting as well, because through this mindset school, we are seeking to equip people with some of those tools that are going to help.
Oh, I've been watching the correspondence. It's been wonderful how honest, how vulnerable, how genuine these students are, Darren, and it gives me great satisfaction to see your wise replies.
Thanks, Dave. So, Dave, let's get on to the questions now. So, firstly, Dave mentioned going back into the past or history in counseling therapy. However, counseling is a present hunt for a present misbelief we have been loyal to. Could you explain the difference? I think it's in the context of when you talked about the revisit, revise versus counseling being in the present.
Okay, well, first of all, we keep it simple. I don't go straight into psychotherapy with a new client because 9 times out of 10, simply tracing the misbeliefs, adding some life skills, and fixing the unbearable feelings, etc., will do the job. 9 times out of 10, those tools are perfectly effective, and we are dealing with the present in the present, and we're giving them some reassurances regarding the past. I will only tackle the historic by taking the person back into the trauma if what we're doing with the cognitive is not working. If they're not getting it, or if their feelings are overpowering them, or if the emotions are eclipsing the truth coaches and they cannot start that new groove in their brain, they cannot practice those new ways of responding because the old is simply overpowering. At that point, it's time to go, okay, let's revisit the trauma. Take me with you. I'll hold your hand so the dragon doesn't get the better of you. And together we will face this thing and go back through it. And we will find out where you went wrong, and understanding that it's not what happened to you that has bruised you so much as how you've learned to think about it. And I'm going to take you back through this encounter now and show you how to think about it for the future. And then we spend maybe 20 minutes, 10 minutes just feeling the feelings and the emotions and learning how to respond to them. And then we come back into the present. It's not exactly hypnotism, but it is a journey back into the past.
Thanks for that, Dave. So really you're saying that if you don't need to go back into the past, then really there is no need. Don't do
that. That's right. And that's why I say don't open up more than you can sew up, and don't take them back to the dragon unless this is the only way they're going to heal.
Okay. So Dave, the next question is about is once I did the why question, I found myself caught in circular reasoning.
Yeah.
Coming back to an earlier reason given to a why. Then I found myself spiraling into a very dark, hopeless thinking. Any advice on breaking out of this cycle?
You don't tackle a dragon till you've got a sword and a shield. Don't go back to the trauma without better insights than you had back then, or you'll just rehearse the pain. And don't attempt do-it-yourself psychotherapy, because you can fall into that dark hole. This is where you should actually get some professional help. Why are you trying to reinvent the wheel? There are people that can make sure you don't fall into that hole. That's what every psychotherapist and counselor should be trained to do, so that you don't end up stuck back in that pit. Effective counseling is not traumatic. It's quite laid back, it's precise, it's measured, but there's not a lot of blood and guts and drama. I only ever do keyhole surgery. There's no drama or blood in my counseling sessions. It's just a very purposeful conversation to enable people to step around that pit and get insights that have never crossed their mind before in their entire lives. Truth and insight that their parents never had access to. Ways of getting past that dragon that they've never even thought of.
So the circular thinking could be, reasoning could be a kind of almost like a vicious loop that they really need some professional help to.
That's exactly what it is. It's emotion-based, emotion-driven, or it cannot free itself from the power and influence of the lie. And as long as that lie is unchallenged, they're going to go round and round in circles. And it could be as simple as realizing that my feelings can lie to me. My feelings are lying to me. I need to dismiss this feeling. It's not the truth. People are very loyal to emotion because for many people, their life is mediated through their emotion. Until you learn how to step around that emotion and discredit it, the circular spiral is all you're going to get. And And I'm very sympathetic to them. I know that circular spiral very well. I work with it every day.
Okay, thanks, Dave. So this is a question. Hi, I totally believe that I'm not my performance, but I'm having a hard time convincing my mind of this truth. I understand, yeah, I understand why I need my mind to believe this, because on a bad day of performance, I will crash. But knowing and understanding this hasn't changed my subconscious belief that I am my performance. What truth coaches might help to convince my mind of this truth that I'm not my performance?
Many people were nurtured from the day of their birth in performance. It's so ingrained. It's our culture. It's our way of behaving. But the best thing to do is start collecting up some truth coaches that can train your brain out of it. For example, I'm a human being, not a human doing. I'm a human being before I've done anything. I'm okay. I'm here because God called me into existence. I belong here. I do not have to earn his approval. Even a baby has value before they've done anything good or bad. I need to stop judging myself and leave all judgment to the only one who's just. And ultimately, we put the cart behind the horse being our essential intrinsic value, and the cart being a happy, successful, responsive life once my self-worth is established unconditionally. Many people put the cart in front of the horse and then they try and drag the whole thing all by themselves. The other side of the coin is how you think about failure. If you believe you are your performance, then failure is very, very dangerous. Whereas for me, failure is a friend. Failure brings a message to me. It comes with a feedback for me. I do not ever take failure personally. I just seek to learn what the message is that it's brought to me. And that also helps free me from a performance-based mindset. The fear of failure keeps performance very much alive. The third answer I would give is to study the vicarious Christ. That's coming up further down the track. But the vicarious Christ reminds us that Jesus already performed perfectly on behalf of every man, woman, boy, and girl ever to come onto the earth. He is our perfect performance, and all of our hope must be centered on him. Just as Adam crushed us, so Jesus lifts us up. And that's why everyone needs to hear that, to release them from self-judgment, self-condemnation, and self-rejection.
Well, that's a beautiful answer. One of the things that reminds me of, Dave, is the importance of having, truth coaches going in a cluster, as it were, or more than just kind of one, but a whole bunch.
Yes, thanks for reminding me of that. One truth coach isn't usually enough. It also has to address our loyalty to our feelings, our life skills, our relationship and comeback and assertiveness skills. It has to address how we came to believe that we were rubbish in the first place. And so you're absolutely correct. They do come better as a cluster.
Okay, failure is my friend. Wow, that's such a cool insight. So, Dave, the next question is, if, as you say, many of the lies we hold are at a subconscious level, how can these be brought to a conscious state so that we may be able to face them and deal to them? Now, I know you've kind of addressed this already a bit, but maybe I'll just also carry on. King David prays this prayer, doesn't he, in which he asked the Lord to point out any uncleanness in his heart. Aren't we all susceptible to having logs in our eyes? We are so often the last one to recognize our blind spots.
Well, the best answer is one of the tools that we'll be teaching further down the track on the empowering question. The empowering question surfaces the subconscious. It lifts the iceberg up out of the water. It helps you to know yourself. And the perfect example of a good empowering question would be the one that Dr. Phil stole off me. How is that working for you? Nah, he didn't really steal it, but I was asking it before he ever came on television. How is that working for you is a very empowering question. How is your anger working for you? How is your dummy spit working for you? How is your tantrum? How is yelling and shouting working for you? How is buying stuff you can't afford when you're bored working for you? That's one example of an empowering question. Where did you learn that is another empowering question. Who taught you that? Did they have their own issues? Was that teacher or parent telling you more about themselves than about you? Did you take it too personally? Anything that surfaces and pulls the rug out from under these lies can be considered an empowering question. Sometimes they result in a yes-no answer, but more often they are an invitation to reflect more deeply on what's really going on. Empowering questions are always an invitation, and they always seek to get you to the real issue and to show you the way forward. And so Jesus asked them, God asked the prophets an empowering question, and people asked each other those empowering questions from time to time in Scripture. And when you understand the skill, you start to see them everywhere in the Bible. But one of my favorites is, who has bewitched you, having begun by faith in the vicarious Christ, are you now being perfected by willpower, discipline, and commitment? My paraphrase, but that's essentially what Paul was asking. Or what about, can these bones live? Or what about, who do men say that I am? You know, the empowering question is designed to bring you face to face with yourself. And I've been practicing this skill now for more than 30 years, and I'm just about getting good at it now. Be patient.
Well, we've been practicing using the question why, and I know that you teach about that too, Dave. Is there any comment that you would add? And you've been seeing people, you practicing using that question why. Is there anything you'd add to help people on that journey?
Well, some people have naturally analytical minds, and they're actually much better with the why question than others. Popular counselling discourages the use of the question why. You'll be taught not to ask why at university when you do your degree in counselling, because A, people are not that analytical or cognitive, and B, because it can feel like blame shifting and pointing the finger. And so the common popular way nowadays is just to concentrate on the what happened. But I'm very impatient with that. If you don't dig deeper, you don't get to the emotions driving the behavior, and you certainly don't get to the misbeliefs at the heart of it. So we need to ask why, and we need to track with people as they go into the unfamiliar territory of diagnosing their belief structure and inspecting their paradigm. We are not taught this by our parents. We are not taught this in general knowledge. Schools don't teach it until they get into chemistry, physics, and science. But unfortunately, they don't teach it in terms of self-awareness. So the why question does take a little bit of persistence, and you do need coaching in it. I don't just drop people into these questions. I coach them right through until they learn the skill for themselves. And so why is that, or why is that an issue, or what's the problem with that, is calculated to lead you deeper, to drill down to the king lie or the assumption.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, so in the teaching video for Module 1, you said unrealistic parental expectations are toxic to children. What are the effects on children and later as adults, especially a parent with something like OCD, everything having to be perfectly in order all the time? How can I use trace, face, replace to help me to dig into this?
How did I learn where the boundaries are? How did I learn behaviorism? How did I learn to try to change without having the necessary insights and reasoning to back that change up? How did I learn that anger is the best way to cope when the behaviorism was coming hot and strong and I was drowning in try harder and rules I couldn't keep? And so behaviorism and its associated religious sister, legalism, is really rules without insight, behavior without the necessary understanding, or just trying to protect our parents from their own unbearable feeling by being controlled, being good, conforming, being compliant. Many parents insist on compliance just so that their own unbearable feelings of irritation or insecurity or powerlessness don't get invoked and they don't crash into their own dreadful feelings. But using children to protect ourselves from our unbearable feeling as parents takes a pretty high toll on the child. And eventually children either collapse or they bucket and rebel.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Okay, so we've got a question here. Is it fair to say that a person with no knowledge of living wisdom strategy can practice 2 Corinthians 10:5, taking captive every thought to the obedience of Christ, and Romans 12 verse 2, being transformed by the renewing of the mind, and obtain the same result without going through the first step of tracing individual lives?
Well, you can do it because people are doing it. You know, most of the world has never heard of living wisdom or trace it, face it, replace it, and yet they're muddling along. They're discovering some beliefs are not true. They are working out what works and what doesn't. All I'm saying really is that my system enables people to do it 100 times more efficiently, much more faster, and the change is permanent. I'm always reaching for tools that bring permanent change. I'm not interested in temporary change or behaviorism or what amounts to try harder. And so as we clear away the old and as we clear the foundations for the new, we know that what is built new will be permanent. But if you try and build new behavior on old beliefs and old loyalties, you're going to fail again and again and again and again. It's always going to keep coming crashing down. The sexual willpower, the expenditure willpower, the New Year's resolutions, the trying to be nice all day, it's not going to work because you're trying to build a cognitive ideal on top of a subconscious wrecked basement. So trace it just helps you to remove the debris of the demolition job before you start rebuilding. And I've seen a lot of people, and this happens a lot in church and in religion too, trying to paint over the rot, trying to paint over the rust, trying to build a brand new building on cruddy old foundations of family mottos and childhood upbringing and emotion-based reasoning. And it just doesn't work. In fact, worse than not working, it leads us straight into hypocrisy and inauthentic living. And that just leaves a bad smell everywhere.
Yeah, and I think the other thing for me, Dave, is that living wisdom's codified. You've codified, you know, that which the scripture talks about and put it into a form that people can relate to and use in a very practical way.
Yeah, making it accessible. When David said, "Why art thou cast down, O my soul?" I want to turn that into a paint by numbers. How do I get control of my emotions? How do I talk back to my moods? How do I talk back to this discouragement? How do I remonstrate with myself? David proved you can do it. He demonstrated it. Now I want to codify it for people who really need to do it for themselves.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, this question covers a bit of ground that that you've already covered, but I think you might want to just add a little more. Seems to me that I must first face the possibility of something in my life with the help of a trustworthy other, then trace before facing again, etc. Breaking through the denials, i.e. minimizing, rationalizing, justifying, over-spiritualizing, etc. To come to the place where I could entertain the possibility that actually, you know, this is happening, that I'm actually facing up to it. Any other comments on the face part of the process and why it's so important?
Okay, well, lots of psychotherapies trace the origin, and I'm thinking of the theophostic or ancient pathways. I'm thinking of El and Freudian psychotherapy, etc. But the purpose of tracing it is to face it. And whether you face it successfully or unsuccessfully will largely depend on the wisdom available, the truth available, the insight available at the moment of confrontation. I steer my clients through that moment with a lifetime of accumulated wisdom. I dedicated my life to searching for truth and insight when I was a teenager, in fact, younger than a teenager. So I've got a lifetime of accumulating wisdom to help them face it and win that confrontation. And then, of course, the battle isn't done yet, because after the facing, we still have to do the replacing, which is the habitualization of new life skills and a new way of thinking. And each of those steps is critical and crucial, and unsuccessful change always results from a failure in one or all of those steps. But the facing one is the moment of crisis, when you unmask the traitor and say, friend or enemy, it's time to decide.
Thanks, Dave. So we're really talking here about spiritual warfare in a way. Can you give us a little bit more insight around that aspect of trace, face, and replace?
The spiritual warfare is traditionally thought of, particularly by charismatics and Pentecostals, as addressing spiritual uncleanness and spiritual darkness, principalities and powers, the demonic, etc. But I have come to the realization slowly over many years that actually they are not the problem, because the thief can only hang about if he has right of access. And we destroy his right of access by renouncing our lies. Jesus was not loyal to any lies, and as he confesses, the destroyer, the thief, Satan, has no place in me. So there's your ultimate exorcism. There is no room for the devil, because there's no room for his lies. When you trace, face, and replace your lies, any unclean spiritual element hanging around you can no longer stay, whether it be occultic or sexual or rage or violence. It cannot stay when you've given up the beliefs that are giving it access. And so it is spiritual warfare, Jim, but not as we know it. It is spiritual warfare, but it's a different approach, perhaps less dramatic, but far more effective in its long-term results. And I would perhaps use Derek Prince at this point, because he said something very profound when he said that God will only deliver you from your enemies, never your friends. And so my process is to help people become fully persuaded that this thing is their enemy. And at that point, then the power of God is released and able to set them free instantly.
So, Dave, the Spirit of Truth, the Holy Spirit, is also called the Comforter. How does reassurance, or what role does reassurance or comfort play in this process?
To answer that, I'm going to start by addressing one of the worst king lies you can ever believe. It's popular, it's common, and it's straight from the pit of hell. And it goes like this: the truth hurts. And well, I bring your attention to this one, people, because it's only half the truth. Let's be clear about this. Truth is the most comforting thing known to humanity. There is nothing more comforting than truth. We go to people for hugs and comfort, sex, emotional reassurance, presents, and birthday celebrations to get comfort, but none of those things work if there's an absence of truth. And so I say this because the only thing that truth hurts is your delusion. truth is anti-delusional. It is like a caustic substance. It cleans out the lies and the delusions. And when I say delusions, I'm talking about the delusion of abandonment, the delusion of isolation, the delusion of inferiority, the delusion of rejection, the delusion of being without God or without support or without ability. And these are the things that hurt. And the only thing that truth ever does is rid you of that corrosive nonsense that's having a go at your soul. So please understand, there is nothing more comforting than truth, and of course the one who claimed that he is the truth.
So Dave, as we think about, we've talked a lot about the subconscious today. Can you give us some insight into how the subconscious relates to the spirit or to the mind of a person?
Yes, in the Bible, the word subconscious doesn't exist, obviously, but it can be translated from the heart or the plans of the heart or the spirit. It's a Freudian term that basically means something beyond the cognitive. And I don't use the term heart. I find that that's too vague or general to be really useful. But when I'm talking about the subconscious, it's okay to think the heart. It's interesting that the Bible actually does make distinctions. And we see it in Proverbs, we see it in Corinthians, we see it in the writings of Paul and Jesus' teachings. So when I think subconscious, I just think too deep to reach easily, or too essential to who I am, to be superfluous. And emotions can be born of the mind and they can be born of the heart, because emotions reflect both what is in the cognitive as well as what's in the subconscious. And that's why it's possible to create an emotion, but it's also why it's possible to have an emotion and not know where the dickens it's coming from. It just wells up, seemingly with a mind of its own. And so the emotions draw on both the cognitive and the subconscious for its sources.
It's fascinating. So is the subconscious mind healed, or is it in bringing the subconscious thoughts to consciousness that, I guess what I'm trying to sort of verbalize is our spirit wounded and need healing, or does it matter, or is it mainly the cognitive that we need to focus?
You've got to get under the floor to inspect the bearers of the building. And so you cannot fix the bearers of the building, the piles of the building at carpet or floor level. And so I have to bring up what's in the subconscious so the person can inspect it. And to do that, we make it cognitive with the empowering question. My client then inspects it and says friend or enemy, and we then dispatch it and send it packing, or else we indulge it and have to go through a lot more pain before we've figured it out. But one thing's for sure, only hypnosis addresses the subconscious in the subconscious without actually involving the person's cognitive mind. And we don't do that because the person was not consciously involved, responsibly involved in the changes that they were perpetrating in their own life. We want a person all hands on deck and not doing stuff behind the scenes they don't even know about.
Okay, thank you, Dave.
It's a bit like the look at me when I'm talking to you because I need your full attention.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. So we've got a couple more questions that that are still related, but are probably a little kind of more within the context of everything we're thinking about. If our works are like dirty rags to God and we can rest in Christ's righteousness, why are we encouraged to fast for breakthrough? Is this not self-effort? Or do I have a misbelief here? I've been wondering about this question for a long time. I know some churches teach that we can rest in our righteousness in Christ, and fasting is our own works. In his church, or in someone's church, they experience healings, etc., without the need to fast. Is there a lie there that needs to be traced, faced, and replaced? I'm glad you're answering the question.
A very good question. And I would answer it at a very simple level by saying, this is not a do-it-yourself cleanup. We don't initiate sanctification, we cooperate. We don't initiate, we cooperate. The initiative is with our Creator. The initiative is in love. The initiative is there waiting for us. Our cooperation is how we appropriate the mind of Christ. It's how we appropriate healthy thinking. It's how we learn how to think straight. So we are cooperating by learning language, by learning meditation, by reading wisdom books, and by making changes in our behavior and in our day. But this is not a do-it-yourself cleanup. This is just living up to the light that we are receiving. And I think that's quite an important distinction, really. I'm not dragging the horse. I'm not dragging the cart. I am sitting on the cart, just learning how to conduct myself with dignity, self-discipline, motivation, and become a winner. You cannot become a winner against nature and against reality. You'll just plunge into delusion. And so the cooperation I speak of here is the process of moving out of fantasy and delusion, a rebellion and foolishness into wisdom. And it's a bit like discovering that you're the son or daughter of the king, but now you've got to learn how to behave in the palace. So fasting is learning how to behave in the palace. It's cooperating with palace protocols. It's discovering who you are and now how to behave according to who you are. When the ugly duck realized that he wasn't actually ugly and he wasn't actually a duck, he then had to learn how to fit in with the swans. And that's what we're talking about here. You don't make yourself a swan by active commitment. You learn how to live like a swan by cooperating with truth. Was that a brilliant answer or what?
No, I thought it was pretty good. So it's kind of like where Paul says, I work, but not I, but Christ works with it.
Yep, that's it. I cooperate, but, you know, we work according to the power that is within us.
Yeah. Okay. What is the process to follow when the replace truth, e.g. that was then, this is now, seems to be violated time and time again? For instance, in South Africa, so many girls have been raped in childhood years only to experience sexual abuse in adult years due to a cultural issue, such as rape is what happens often. The same would apply to a situation where violent crime is witnessed as a child and again later in adult life. The witness then faces the danger of being killed by a suspect gang member or by another member of the gang, and so lives in constant fear.
You know, you've got to have spoken with a woman who's been through that and repeatedly abused, but who has not given up in her search for dignity, truth, and wisdom. And there you discover the dominance of the human spirit. I had a woman say to me, this man can abuse me as much as he likes, but he can never touch my soul. And my soul knows that my dignity does not come from a man. And, you know, I got the feeling talking to her that breakthrough that she had made in herself meant that she was invincible and indestructible. And she said, I teach that to all the women I know, that no man can tell you who you are, and you do not need to leave your self-worth or value in any man's hands, and that your sexuality is something of beauty and worth and dignity, and no man can defile that unless you let him. And I was just so impressed with that. that again, it reinforces to me, it's not what happens to you in life that can damage you, it's how you think about it. Life is 10% situation and 90% attitude, but attitude is 100% self-talk, 100% beliefs, 100% perception.
Thank you, Dave.
That's such an important question.
Yeah, wow, that and that's an incredibly powerful answer.
Oh, yeah. And can I recommend a couple of booklets on that very subject, both by Paul Bilheimer. Paul Bilheimer, Don't Waste Your Sorrows, and the second book, The Mystery of His Providence. We'll get that written up somewhere for you, but those two books are the best little booklets I have read on that very subject. Don't Waste Your Sorrows and The Mystery of His Providence by Paul Bilheimer. You can spell it any way you like.
Yeah. So you're really saying, Dave, that our dignity is in our hands.
Exactly. And the dignity is the natural result of taking God's perspective on everything. That's what mental and emotional health is, actually. It's just adopting God's perspective. I shouldn't say just, it's a lifetime's work, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we've got a couple more questions and then we're going to be finishing up for tonight, for today. And so I've been back over the fundamentals and wonder if you would be able to give some examples of making sure that your expectations don't bully you.
Well, in short answer, it's learning to be kind to yourself. I'm always amazed at how many parents know how to be kind to their children, but their self-talk on themselves is horrendous. They're beating themselves up, they're abusing themselves, they're abusing themselves, their self-talk is horrendous because their inner mind is not talking to their domestic mind. They're not lowering their expectations for themselves. If the child brings home a painting that you can hardly comprehend, it's all congratulations and compliments. But if they go to night class and try it, their attitude to their own inability will be wicked. So it begins with showing grace to yourself and giving yourself the same patience you might give a student or a child. And it continues with making friends with failure, so that failure is not taken personally. It doesn't disappoint you, fill you with despair, or shock you, or discourage you. You change your attitude completely to failure, and you remember that his yoke is easy and his burden is light. So whose yoke are you under and whose burden are you carrying? I believe that life should be fun. There is sadness and there is grief, but ultimately you shouldn't oppress yourself by the way you talk to yourself. So when David said to himself, "Why art thou cast down, O my soul?" he's going, hey, lighten up, you're killing me. Lighten up, things are going to get better. Lighten up, the flowers are still blooming, the sun's still shining, you're not starving, you're not dying, you're not abandoned and homeless. Come on, be kind to yourself and focus on that attitude of gratitude rather than just on whatever's going wrong. You know, whatever gets your attention is going to get you. And that's how you learn to be good to yourself, be kind to yourself, and live in grace.
Great challenge there. So you said last live coaching call that God needs us. I'd love to hear you elaborate on this. I know we're doing this further down the track, but so as I've had more of the mentality that he loves us and wants us to take part in his plan and invites us to join him in what he's up to, but not that he needs us. My thoughts have been down the line of he can get the job done without us. He just welcomes us to take part opposed to he needs us?
Well, theology teaches us that whenever you use a verb or an adverb or an adjective of God, you've got to let God define it. So the moment we say something like God needs us, we have to let God define that term need. So I'm not saying that God needs you the way you need oxygen or the way you need water or the way you need sleep. I'm saying that God has freely chosen to need you. Now, some people object to that. They call it humanism or whatever, and I understand that, but they're not listening, because what I say is that when God freely chooses to need you, what that means is that he's given you a priceless gift, the ability to be his friend, and he needs your friendship. Now, some people say, don't say God needs you, say God wants you. And I say, yeah, well, I'm happy to say God wants you, but he wouldn't want you unless he had a need for you. So follow the logic. God doesn't want you if you're already redundant. Do you know he only ever made one of you for a reason? And that makes you irreplaceable. It makes you truly unique. And God wouldn't have made you unique unless he wanted you that way. I've also come to understand that if you propose kidnapping a baby, then the argument that the mother doesn't need that baby because the mother pre-existed that baby just as God pre-existed us is not going to wash. So that baby somehow is essential to her, and she will not rest until that baby is restored and recovered. And in the same way, it's like God will not rest until those people, expressions of his heart, his soul, his life, are recovered. I sometimes quote to people that our hearts remain restless until they find their rest in God. But then I turn it around and say, and God's heart is restless until he recovers you. So I believe that God created me because he needs me. He needs me to redeem his earth. He needs me to make the world a better place. But above that, he needs me for friendship. God loved Enoch because Enoch did not withhold his friendship from God. He walked with him and talked with him. And John, the disciple, the beloved disciple, etc., David the psalmist, I believe that somewhere God needed their love and their friendship, because otherwise, why would Jesus stand outside the door and just knock your whole life long? What's going to motivate that? Well, love is going to make that. Well, what is love? Love is the realization and the belief that somehow, essentially and mystically, we are connected. And when we are disconnected, something is very, very wrong. So I guess God needs us in the same way that a mother needs a baby. That baby is and always will be, in some mystical way, a part of her. I could go on about this because it's a favorite topic of mine. But this is what introduces us to the vulnerable God, the God who is not above and beyond, but is walking with us, talking with us, laughing with us, and crying with us, because that's why he called us into existence, for koinonia, for friendship. And that's why Jesus said, hey guys, watch with me while my soul is troubled, because I need your love and your companionship. We must not lose sight of the humanity of Christ and the human face of God.
Wow.
And to be human is to be vulnerable.
Yeah. And I guess we've got to put away our own sort of kind of mum and dad images of God before we can accept a lot of what you're saying, Dave.
Exactly. But if parents missed us when we left home, how much more does God miss us when we leave home?
Yeah.
And like the prodigal son story, he just waits for us to come back.
Okay, so we're going to wrap this up now. Just a couple of just things to be aware of, and then I'm going to hand back to Dave for the final word. Just from a next steps perspective, hey, keep the contribution going. I'm loving seeing the way the community is developing and growing and really starting to support one another, which is really cool. That's that's a big part of what that community is there for. Now, the new module around truth coaches will be released tomorrow. Don't forget to check out the checkpoint around trace, face, and replace. Have a look at that before moving on, just to make sure you've really covered all the material and achieved the objectives. A few people have mentioned that they're interested in coaching, and we will have more detail for you on that later. In the meantime, take the opportunity to support others in the forum, not in the nature of giving of advice, but rather in the sharing of truth coaches, encouragement, in applying the living wisdom process, that kind of stuff. So hey, if that's your aspiration, then there's a great opportunity here to really contribute to others' development by the sharing of your truth, sharing of your own personal experience, and the encouragement in the processes that we're learning. So looking forward to seeing you continuing in the community next week, and I'm going to hand over to Dave to finish this call. Thanks, Dave.
Yes, can I just validate what you're saying? It's one thing to be discussing topics and subjects. It's quite another to be discussing your own life. And once you put it out there in that forum, you lose control of it. So do keep that in mind when you're trying to get to the heart of the matter. My encouragement to you while you're studying is to be patient with yourselves and to be kind to yourselves and lower your expectations. I've been 40 years developing this thing. I don't expect you to get a hold of it in 40 days or 40 minutes or whatever. Just continue to saturate yourself in the concepts, and they will do the work for you. In other words, don't try too hard. Let the concepts, as you dwell on them and think about them, they will do the work for you, so that you will kind of just move along and hardly be aware of any great effort or commitment on your part. This is not try harder, and this is not commitment based. This progress is insight based, and we'll be thrilled for you just to hear that you're getting these insights and that you're able to start to apply them in your own life. But please be kind to yourself, be patient with yourself, and if you don't understand something, just continue on, because as we go cyclically, it will be revealed to you further down the track. For example, how psychology and religion fits together. For example, why, if we've got all these truth coaches, do we still need Jesus? Stuff like that. It becomes more and more obvious as we continue. So don't panic. We know what we're doing. We've been doing this a long time. We'll get you there.
Thanks, Dave. Oh.